After 4 years of waiting impatiently for the follow-up to Fallen Order, Respawn's Jedi Survivor has finally been released, and after 2 months of sitting on my hard drive, I have finally gotten around to reviewing it. That was a little funnier in my head, but I'll keep going. I was a little concerned that the game wouldn't live up to the hype, but it's honestly way better than I ever expected it to be. As a sequel, it's everything I wanted and then some. It's bigger, it's dense, and its story is so good that it's up there with one of my favorite Star Wars stories ever. Hyperbolic? Yes, but still very true. When playing Survivor, the first scene that pops out and grabs you is the visuals. I've never really focused on graphical fidelity or polygonal count, but Survivor is an obvious step up in quality from Fallen Order. Obviously, as a next-gen exclusive game, it can do lots of things that the previous gen just can't handle. And damn, everything just looks like a tech demo this time around. The scale of this game and its worlds are much more grand in order to fit the story it's telling, and it works very, very well. Speaking of different worlds, there's a wide variety of ones that we explore this time around. Coruscant, Jeddah, Kobo, its moon, Nova Garen, and later on Tanalorr, but that doesn't really count in my eyes. Each of which has their own distinct design and feel, which you'd kinda expect with Star Wars. The attention to detail, regardless of each world's size, is honestly surprising. Even environments that we're used to, like the Mantis, have been given a clear bump up in pixel count as well as fidelity. Even in performance mode, which is how I played this on my PS5, this game is a sight to see. Even little things like Cal's hair reacting to the wind, I love it so much. I will say that the performance wasn't the best, at least right when I first bought the game near launch. Not the only one who's observed many of the issues with this game. Pop-in, crashes, frame rate drops. All of this also happened with Fallen Order when it launched, but I'll get into that later. Let's talk about the good stuff for now. First off, Jedi Survivor does something that not many other games do, Star Wars or not, which is that it doesn't undo the main character's progress in the previous game. It's something you've just gotten used to and kind of expect when a sequel comes around, that your progress is just going to go back to zero and you have to regain all the new skills in the previous game slowly but surely. But in this it makes a lot of sense, since the first game was about a Padawan becoming a Jedi Knight, and if we started at zero again, it creates some major dissonance. And so, Cal starts off with all of his force powers he's already obtained. Push, pull, double jump, even the rebreather you get on Kashyyyk is still here. I've always loved seeing that, since you don't really see that much outside of episode 1. And of course, you obtain lots of new stuff in this game, my favorite of which being the mid-air dash and your special attack. I will say that this game does play very, very different from Fallen Order. Survivor strays away from the parry-heavy, for the lack of a better term, Dark Souls-esque combat system of the first game, not because it was especially difficult or anything, but because of its emphasis on mechanics seen in most FromSoft titles. And personally, I think that it's a change that benefits this game specifically. I never had an issue with the original game's content. It fits more with Cal's development as a Jedi. But since this takes place 5 years after Fallen Order, it feels different that he's a bit faster and stronger. However, as a trade-off, the game does feel a lot easier. I often noticed myself focusing a lot less on parrying or my stamina meter at all like I was in the first game, so there is that. I think Respawn wanted to give the player a bit more leeway so that they could experiment with the new lightsaber stances, which is this game's big focus. Obviously, there's the single and double blades, standard enough, but later in the game, the dual blades, crossguard, and blaster stances are introduced. I will say that having avoided all of the additional trailers, the blaster stance was a nice surprise, even though it is on the fucking cover. Just never thought that I'd see the day where I get to play as a Jedi with a gun after the Jedi Knight series. My other favorite is crossguard. Can you tell who my favorite sequel character was? The crossguard stance, I have it written looks the way it feels, but I meant plays the way it looks. What the fuck? The crossguard stance plays the way it looks. It's heavy and it's bulky. The animations are slow, so you have to play it careful. But the payoff is absolutely massive with the amount of damage that it does. Some people don't think that this weapon made of light should have weight. Personally, fuck the cannon, I think it's cool. I will say that it's a shame that you can only choose between 2 at a time, but it's also fun to try out a new stance you're not very familiar with, and try to learn the different speeds and windows that you have in combat. The worlds this time around are much bigger than the first games. So much so that I'd almost teeter on calling this a semi-open world. Kobo especially. It's this massive sort of hub world with varying levels of verticality. And it, like the other worlds, is very dense with tons of things to explore and do. Survivor has a much less emphasis on puzzles in the first game, and as much as it's still a very combat-heavy title, it's much more of a platformer than you'd expect. About 30 to 40% of this game will be wall running and double jumping all over the fucking place. And it's not that cinematic Naughty Dog style platforming where you're forced to go slow either. Don't get me wrong, love me some Uncharted, I need it in small doses. Traversal feels a lot more natural, and that's mostly due to the animations. They're smooth and expressive and manage to make Cal feel like an actual person with weight. I will say that it's confirmed that Stig Asmussen watches my videos since Respawn took all of my advice from my Fallen Order video. And not to toot my own horn, but as a result, this is probably the best customization I've seen in a Star Wars game. The ways that you can alter the blaster, the lightsaber, and BD-1 are all perfect. Down to deciding how rusted you want them to be, or what angle you want the crossguard to be at, or what material you want the gun to be made out of. It's so perfect. All of Cal's attire can be customized, even his hair and beard, which is a nice addition. My favorite is the headband, it feels like I'm in an 80s aerobics video. Lots of the cosmetic options are inspired by other characters, like this bomber jacket, which is just ripped straight from The Force Unleashed. And who could forget the Sumi Pink poncho? I adore how much Cameron Monaghan and Respawn have played into the joke after Fallen Order's release. It's only made me ironically love that thing even more. As a fan of action games, there's lots of great set pieces here that I was genuinely surprised by. Chasing Bode on the speeder sticks out in my mind, as well as fighting the ATST in the middle of the sandstorm. But my favorite hands down is the drill sequence very early in the game. It's a little interesting how all these take place on Jedha. The drill sequence honestly rivals the Star Destroyer scene in The Force Unleashed. Not in terms of scale, obviously, just as much of how much of a spectacle it was. However, Survivor doesn't have many QuickTime events. Everything is really done through gameplay, which in my opinion keeps you on your toes more than pressing a random button every couple seconds. So I mentioned that the worlds are dense, but I don't think you understand just how much additional content is in this game. There's a lot of interesting NPCs to speak to. Shout out Turgle, he's my favorite. Each of these characters fleshes out their respective worlds, specifically Kobo, and makes them feel very lived in, which I like. Most of them also have some sort of side activity tied to them. You can hunt down bounties for Cage, find Priorite shards to spend in Donna's shop, find data discs and trade them with Z. You can even scan enemies and use them in holo chests, which is so fucking cool. That's not even counting stuff like finding chests across the galaxy or completing force tears, which are these very short challenges. Some are platforming, but most of them are combat based. What separates Survivor from something like a Ubisoft game or any sort of by-the-numbers open world is that this doesn't overstay its welcome. Whenever you get tired of hunting down bounties or collecting fish or seeds, you're probably pretty close to completing that side activity. They're all pretty short. Nothing here feels bloated or needlessly extended. While this isn't a game that I'd usually instantly replay under standard circumstances, the New Game Plus had some goodies that I really wanted to play with. It wasn't funny when I wrote it a month ago, and it's not funny when I'm recording it now. There's some special perks in New Game Plus, one of which adds new enemy encounters. I had to turn it off after a couple hours because I ended up fighting way too many Wampas. One randomizes cosmetics at death, and then there's Purity, which ups both Cal and enemies' damage. It makes the lightsaber feel less like a blunt weapon, which is a problem for most Star Wars games, with the trade-off that guns do a lot of damage. So for those people who really are sticklers for the canon, good luck playing with that one. The random encounters and Purity add a lot to an already great game that makes it well worth a replay down the line. This is honestly the most I've ever talked in depth about a game's systems and mechanics in one of these reviews, and it's simply because Respawn took stock of what worked in Fallen Order, looked at previous titles that people loved, and innovated on them to create just a damn good game. I put in about 30 hours over the span of about 3 weeks, in between other games of course, and I'll say that I've gotten my worth out of this and then some. Alright, enough gameplay stuff, let's talk about story spoilers, buckle the fuck up. Jedi Survivor story is a prime example of when I say it's not about being cliche, it's about being interesting. The story has a lot, and I do mean a lot of tropes. In the opening mission of the game, Cal has this crew that he's got great chemistry with. Obviously, each and every one of them dies, save for the new guy, who does end up being evil. His master dies, yada yada yada. This is Star Wars, you know exactly what the fuck this is. You can honestly tell it all coming from a mile away, but that's not really an issue. Despite knowing what will probably end up happening, Survivor still was interesting and captivating because of the way it uses these tropes. The narrative really delves into the more complexities of Jedi trying to exist and adapt during this specific period of time between episodes 3 and 4, since there's still about 9 years until the events of A New Hope. Or the Battle of Yavin, if you really want to talk about biblical terms. It's interesting to see the different paths Jedi take when they don't have the guise of a doctrine to hide behind. It's especially interesting if you love the prequels just as much as I did, and hate the Jedi Order as much as I do. Obviously, we saw similar themes in the last game with Trilla and Terran Malicos, but here we see it with Dagan, Bode, and Cal himself. Dagan is a fine villain. Yeah. That's how I'll describe him. He's meant to be a hammy bad guy, and I like that. Although, as someone who isn't really well versed or frankly interested in the High Republic era, the majority of the opening was a bit difficult to get attached to or even invested in at all. Bode's villain reveal is done impeccably well, all thanks to Nashir Dalal's fucking star-studded performance. Mr. Nashir, or Mr. Dalal if you prefer. I don't care if you're a fucking Force Ghost, I need you to fucking return next time. You were great as Gray in Squadrons, and you did an amazing job here too. I need you in more Star Wars stuff. Become the new Sam Witwer or D. Bradley Baker, please. Throughout the entire game, Bode obviously has something going on, but the game surprisingly held its cards very close to its vest. So when he was revealed to be a villain, I was not surprised, but when he was revealed to be a fallen Jedi, I damn near fucking pissed myself. When Bode tells his daughter that Cal is his best friend, the fact that he means it makes it all the more infuriating. Once Bode is revealed to be the secondary antagonist, the game takes a turn for the better. Like, it was already good, but the speeder chase, the Bode boss fight, and playing as Seer back to back to back was like sensory overload, but in a good way. That hour or so was just the cream of the crop in terms of Star Wars games. And it's all capped off by finally having a boss fight as Seer with Darth Vader. After running away last time, finally getting to fight him one-on-one felt so damn great. Seer's death was, again, obvious. It's a Star Wars story. Have you literally seen the first movie? Any sort of mentor or parental figure is already dead the moment that the pen goes to the page. But what matters is that it didn't feel cheap. It all felt earned. She went out swinging, and we, the player, can feel her tenacity and selflessness because we played through her last moments, instead of just watching it through a screen. Survivor used the medium of games to tell a story in a way that can only be done through interactivity. I love to see it. Cal's flirtation with the dark side is very understandable. It almost makes me wish for a game adapting the prequel trilogy from the perspective of Anakin. Don't worry, I'll wait for my $1 million. As you're playing through the last few hours, on one hand, I want Bode's head on a fucking pike, but on the other, you'd be doing the same thing that the Empire did to you, Marilyn, Seer, and countless others. The way that the story makes not just Cal struggle with the dark side, but you as well, is amazing. That complexity, that incessant want to do good, even though you feel all this anger, is so captivating as a player. After Survivor, Cal has grown beyond just a simple game protagonist and has become one of my personal favorite characters in Star Wars. Grease and Seer didn't have that much time in the game, but Marilyn gets a ton to do this time around, and she's a great addition. Marilyn and Cal getting together only took 30 or so hours, but it was damn well worth it. The relationship is done so well, and a breath of fresh air after the thing we will not talk about. Kata visiting her father, inspiring Mirren, Grease, and Cal to do the same, was just so fucking beautiful and an amazing way to cap off the game. The implications of a Cal struggling with the dark side, as well as him, Marin, and Grease having to take in Kata as their own, is very, very interesting, and I cannot wait to see what Respawn comes up with for the end of the trilogy. I guess that's all really my spoiler thoughts, or story thoughts in general. It's fucking good. Man, I could talk about this game and all its moving parts for hours. Its combat, story, soundtrack. Ooh, the soundtrack. Great googly moogly. Stephen Barton and Gordy Hobb return once again, and I am thankful. This soundtrack borrows lots of motifs from the first game, as well as creating entirely new melodies that sound more reminiscent of A New Hope and The Force Awakens, respectively. There's lots of light strings and wind instruments, makes for some great exploration music. Jedi Survivor is just addictive. Whenever I would be doing something else, I would only be thinking about all the different chests that I could access with a new move I acquired, or some new side objective that I had to do. It's that sort of game that sits in your brain a long while after you play it. It's very, 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 very good. Although, like any other game, I can't not mention the issues that this game had performance-wise, especially with that fucking $70 price point, which I can complain about until the end of time. Listen. For real, one-on-one. If you're going to use the excuse that these games are getting more expensive and that the additional $10 allows EA to keep their lights on or something, despite reaching $7.4 billion this past fiscal year, on top of having $20 worth of paid DLC at launch, at fucking least, give developers time to remove the kinks. If there was an agreement that I'd pay a bit more so the game could be pushed back by a month or so, allowing the developers to sort out these bugs, I'd be less upset. I wouldn't be completely qualmed, but I'd be less furious. But guess what? That's not how game development works. That release date was picked to satisfy investors, and to generally satisfy EA on the business side of game development, aka publishing. The fact is, from what we understand, games are made very, very similarly to the way that they were when the standard was $60. Nothing has changed whatsoever, so you just end up paying more for a product that's still not in a finalized state. It's fucking ridiculous. I get that value is something that can date a review to a certain extent, but with these $70 games, it sucks that I always have to have an asterisk. Especially when something like Resident Evil 4 Remake is $10 less. Between you and me, I fucking hate comparing media like that, because art deserves more. Each and every piece of art deserves to be approached on its terms, in good faith. However, at the same time, it's also a product that costs money. So whether or not you want to buy Jedi Survivor in its current state depends on your opinion of the price hike, EA as a developer, as well as if your platform of choice is PC, since that seems to be hit the worst, as usual. But as a game, I can't commend Respawn enough on what they've done here. It's a must play for fans of Fallen Order, and those who are just interested in a great Star Wars game. This is the longest review I've ever made since like Final Fantasy VII Remake or Web of Shadows. It's breaking new ground! Anyways, thank you for all watching. I can't. It's so fucking late. It's 1:47 a.m. It's hot as fuck, and I'm fucking exhausted. I hope you all enjoyed. Like, subscribe, and all that jazz. I'll catch you guys next time. Later, kids. Have a good night. Records, read, video outro. Hello, Guinness? Okay, I'll stop.